Hello, crafty friends, and welcome back to another episode of Crafting for Profit Live. We are your go-to podcast for turning your creativity into a thriving business. And today we're talking about something every maker dreams of, building a craft business that lasts.
We are joined by Marie, longtime maker, crochet designer, and blogger from the Underground Crafter. Marie has been in the crafting world for years, and she's seen firsthand what it takes to create a business that stands the test of time through trends, algorithm changes, and even those slow seasons that every creator faces.
So this episode was pre-recorded, but if you're watching the YouTube premiere with us, we're hanging out in the chat. You can ask us any questions there. If you're listening later, be sure to check the show notes or video description for links to connect with Marie, ask us questions, and so much more.
All right, so we can dive in. I'm just going to apologize right off the bat that I am recovering from a cold. So if my voice sounds a little difficult today, it's because it is. All right, Marie, you have been running creative businesses for quite a while now, from your crochet design to teaching, blogging, all of these different things. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and how your business has evolved over the years?
Sure, and thank you both for having me on today. I have pretty much always lived in high cost of living areas, and I've always worked in the nonprofit sector. So I always was looking for like a side hustle outside of my job, even from, many years ago. And what I kind of eventually figured out is it would be better if I could create a business of my own that would be that source of income rather than, working for somebody else where there would be so many restrictions on my schedule. I'd be dealing with people I didn't like, all the things. That's kind of, the backstory of why I was even looking to start something. So I started my business right in the aftermath of the 2008 kind of global economic crisis. And there wasn't even that much to do in terms of side jobs anyway. I lived in New York City at the time. Our whole financial services industry was like crumbling. A lot of nonprofits were actually closing because they relied on funding from other organizations. So it was like kind of a really challenging time. And one of the things that I always like to do is be creative in those times. I've been crafting since I was a kid. So initially I kind of went the craft fair route, but that really wasn't for me. First of all, I just can't really make the same thing over and over. So my merchandising was always really bad. Like my table was just like random stuff. It just wasn't really for me. And also I didn't have a car. So I was like lugging stuff on the subway, for 45 minutes with carts, and it just was a bad scene. So I kind of transitioned at that time. There was a lot of these new platforms, which now are old, in terms of like Etsy and Ravelry and places where you could sell PDF downloads for the first time. Originally, I was teaching a lot in New York. And then as I was teaching, crochet and knitting, people would say, oh, I want to learn how to do this, or I want a pattern for that. So I started kind of designing patterns and selling them. And that was a better fit for me because it's just something you could do at any time of day. You didn't have to go anywhere. And it was a little bit more passive income once you kind of got the product out the door. So that was something that was a kind of a better fit for me, and also was, teaching, which was fun. And I still teach. My full-time job now, I'm a college professor, and as far as teaching crafts, there's, ebbs and flows, as you probably both know, seasonality and all that stuff. So it wasn't something totally reliable year round. Over the years, it evolved from designing for magazines, selling some patterns here and there on different platforms. And then eventually I started a blog. Initially it was more of like a local idea to get people interested in the classes I was teaching. And then I started to realize the monetization possibilities. So I sort of shifted more towards a monetized blog, looking at, ad revenue and affiliate income, as well as, still selling the pattern PDFs. And so I just basically kept adding things and taking away things that didn't really work for me, for my life, for whatever reason, until I kind of ended up with this business that has a lot of different elements. Right now, I still do a lot of freelance work for the remaining magazines that still exist. I still do mostly self-publishing of my own designs and things on my blog. I try to make it so that everything I do has kind of multiple ways of making money because it's just more stable that way. And also it kind of a little more protective if there's different downturns and things like that. So, I mean, in terms of today, what I mostly do is primarily pattern design. I do work with some companies and do sponsorships and things like that, but I would say like the bulk of my income is through designing new patterns, and that includes various different ways of monetizing that.
I like that you talk a lot about evolving, because for those of us who have been around a very long time, both Angie and I have, I started about the same time you did. It really, you have to figure out how to evolve with the times, because if you just want to sit there and do the same thing that you've always been doing, you're definitely going to be left behind.
It's so true. I mean, the number of just social media platforms that have arisen and crashed in the time that my business has been around is like, you know, astronomical, let alone different websites that you might have worked with, companies you partnered with. I mean, there's just always something changing. And I think part of having longevity is being willing to learn new things and try new things and know that not everything's going to work as well as something else. And, you know, whereas I think if you don't do that, if you expect like it's going to be exactly the same forever, it's really not something you can do in today's world at all.
Yeah, so I love your beginning story because it is very similar to mine. Started at a similar time. I also don't like to make things over and over again. I also dove really deep into like the digital aspect of this crafting business. And I love that you talked about having a lot of different basically arms and ways to make money to make this a successful business. I feel like that's the key that a lot of people miss when they start this. They think they're going to make their money one single way, but you have to have a lot of different ways to make money in order to make it sustainable and even it out a little bit throughout the year. So where you're making a little bit of money with a lot of different things all throughout the year.
Definitely. And I think also it's like if you look at other businesses in the world that are not craft businesses, there's really no business that's successful that just has one product. So you have to think about yourself as a business, and no business is like that, right? So you wouldn't be like that either. And that's kind of the perspective that I take on it also.
All right. So a lot of crafters struggle to keep that momentum going when things get tough. So you have slow sales times, you have burnout in this business. There are changes in platforms, like you mentioned. So what are some key habits or mindsets that have helped you stay consistent and keep going?
So I think one of the biggest ones is just being willing to learn. A friend of mine that's also been in the business a long time, we're always joking sort of, oh, I don't want to learn one more thing. But in reality, if you really don't want to learn new things, it's really tough in today's business landscape. So in terms of mindsets, I think one of the benefits of having a business that has been this long is you do understand the ebbs and flows. I mean, I remember, you know, maybe my first or couple years that I was blogging with ads, and then being shocked like, oh my gosh, my income is so low in, let's say, May, which is a really slow time for crocheters. But now I know, okay, it's going to dip in the spring to the summer. So because of that, there's different things I can do either to use my time better, like maybe that's the time that I'm learning something, I'm taking a class, or I can say, well, I really want to do something big in the summer that tries to draw more attention. So because I kind of know the cycles a little bit more, it helps me to plan. And like I said, just knowing that I'm always going to be learning new things. And for me, that works because I like doing different things all the time. It is fun to learn new things, even when, you know, sometimes they go out of business 5 weeks later or something. I remember when, you know, like Periscope and things like that, these different social media that were supposedly going to be so big, and then they just kind of crashed and burned. So there's things like sometimes it doesn't necessarily pay off, but I think in terms of mindset is understanding there's always something transferable you can take away from it. So maybe I don't know how to use that specific platform, or knowing that platform isn't relevant, but I learned something about video that I can apply to something else. So I think the mindset of sort of saying everything I'm learning is going to help me somehow, it's going to be transferable. For those of us that some element of teaching, whether in person or through YouTube or other thing, is part of your business, I think using that uncomfortability that you feel when you're learning something to incorporate that into your teaching, because you know what you're doing in your craft, right? And your followers don't. So kind of taking how you feel when you're learning something new and thinking, how would I teach this to someone who's feeling that way? Trying to transfer all the different experiences that you're having into something else that is helpful to your business, I think is one of the key mindsets. And then, constantly learning and thinking about how can you use the times of year that aren't as significant financially for you, either to take a break so you don't have as much burnout. Like, is this the time that you shouldn't be pushing up against the reality that people are not going to be doing as much of whatever it is that you have to offer? And so you can be resting and preparing for another time of year? Or is it a time that you should be relying on different income sources? So just kind of understanding for yourself, what are your ways of using those slower seasons that kind of help you thrive long term, rather than just thinking about it as, oh, just this 1 year, what do I do in this 1 month, So those are the things that I've found really helpful.
Big businesses also, they talk about continuous education. So they are constantly training their employees, putting their employees through education, making sure that they're learning all these new things. So this continuous education that Marie's talking about is something that big businesses do as well. So treat your small business that way. Treat yourself as a bigger business and be sure that you are continuously getting educated on different things. And I have a really great example. So Marie was talking about social media that goes away. So there was an app called Vine, and it was 6-second videos, and it was super popular for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
But I got super into it, and yes, it went away, but that taught me how to make a really good reel. Because I could fit so much into 6 seconds. All of a sudden I had, 30-second reels at the time, or 60 seconds to, expand on that even. And it taught me how to make a good short video. So I learned something even though the platform went away.
Definitely. And I mentioned before that I'm a professor. I teach business at the school where I work. And there are so many of the companies that are really good companies that people would want to work for. They do have those embedded learning opportunities because they understand it too. People can't just be stagnant in this kind of environment that we live in now.
So you talked a little bit about this, but let's talk a little bit more about how to adapt. So everything is changing, especially when it comes to social media and other platforms, different tools that we're using. How do you decide if it's like worth investing your time, or what you're like, okay, that is just a passing fad, I'm just not even going to bother with it?
Yeah. So I think my answer for myself is slightly different than what I would suggest for someone if it's their full-time business. Because again, for me, this is like, it's a chunk of my income that's substantial, but it's not my full-time job that pays all the bills. And so I think those are kind of different answers. But for me, as a part-time business owner, I'm not the first one to jump on any trend. I don't need to be the initial person that is the first one that tries something. So I wait to sort of see, is this panning out? If it seems like it's going to stay, who are the people that I know? Because a big part of being long-term in this industry is getting to know other creators. So who are the people that I know that are actually doing this? What can I ask them? What resources can they direct me to that they've already been using it and doing it well? If I was only using this as my full-time business, I would say that there would be some things that I would probably jump on sooner, because there are a lot of benefits for certain platforms, for example, for being kind of the first mover. So like if you're the first person that picks up on something new, it's very likely that you're going to get kind of a stronghold there and build a bigger audience, let's say. So in that case, you still have to be kind of selective, but you might make moves a little bit faster than I would. One of the things I do is I try to play to my strengths. I am one person, even though I have, different contractors that I work with. Ultimately, I'm sort of the creative force and the CEO of my business. So I don't tend to lean into things that really are virtually impossible for me or things that I hate, tremendously. So for instance, when I had my podcast, one of the things I liked about it is I live in typically small apartments in large urban areas with a high cost of living. That's just, my background. So I didn't always have a great space to show. So I would do an audio podcast because that leans into my small space, my ability to connect with people on a more personal level because they're listening to me in their earbuds, that kind of thing. Whereas I might not necessarily say, oh, wow, lives are really big now on YouTube. Let me jump into that because it's just harder for me to put it together. So I want to try to lead with my strengths. So in every type of new change, there's different things that are going to appeal to your strengths, right? Something might be more about collaboration. Something might be more about video. Something might be more about writing. Something be more about audio. So sort of thinking about what are the things I'm already good at, and does this new thing relate to that? Then I might jump on it a little bit faster because it's sort of something I'm naturally going to be inclined to do, even though, I'm going to have to learn new things and I'm going to have to try new things. It'll be a little bit easier in terms of the experimentation. So for me, that's something that's usually worked.
I always try and grab my handles. Like that's kind of like, even if I'm not going to check it out, even if I'm like, if this takes off, I'll do it. But like, if I see something trending that people are like, hey, you should try this new app, I'll just go and grab my handle, my Hey, Let's Make Stuff handle, just so I have it, so that nobody, one, tries to pretend to be me, and two, I don't have to be like, hey, let's make stuff one or something,
Right.
So I feel like that's another little thing you can do. Even if you're not ready to jump on a new technology or trend, you can just grab your handle, and it's a good place to start.
Definitely true. And even when I've done stuff like that, I'll even just usually leave a comment on my profile like, I'm so-and-so, but I don't really post here or something like that. So people might know, okay, this is not going to have any action yet. But I agree, having your real handle and having consistency across handles is super helpful.
I would say that I use the same rough criteria that you do. I will say that I kind of look at the platform as well as like, is it a platform that I could repurpose easily, something I'm already doing? So for instance, I'm not a huge fan of TikTok. The commenters aren't very nice. I don't get a lot of traction over there, but I can easily repurpose the reels that I'm already making on Instagram and actually have a presence on TikTok. Very simple to do, doesn't take me a lot of time. So for something that I can repurpose, I'm just going to go ahead probably and jump on the platform when it starts getting popular and just use the content I'm already creating.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you're not necessarily optimizing it for TikTok. And I think that's what happens where people get discouraged is they're like, oh, I can't be on TikTok unless I'm perfect at TikTok. So I have to know everything. And it's more like what you're talking about. Like if you're in this for the long haul, you're not going to be the best at everything. There's going to be things where you put more attention or less attention. So you might be looking at it more, not like, how do I have the fully optimized TikTok presence, but how can I be there and still, use something that I already have? And so I think that just subtle change in perspective opens up a lot more opportunities to try things out and to play with them and to sort of say, does this work for me or not? If you're not necessarily looking at every new thing as the place where you're going to excel immediately. And I think a lot of small business owners that are in the creative space, like we have really high aesthetics, right? Like we're creative. We want things to look beautiful or scary or whatever our, kind of identity is. But we're not used to things being sort of ugly and messy because that's what learning is like. It's not always gorgeous. So just sort of giving yourself that freedom that you're not going to be perfect in every space, especially at the start, that just takes a lot of pressure off of yourself so that you're more able to experiment. And you may actually end up being really great on that platform, but you haven't set yourself up to have these super high expectations out of the gate.
All right, Marie. So you've built multiple income streams, including you've sold patterns, you're teaching, you're writing, you had a podcast at one time, you mentioned that. So for makers who are out there, our listeners, how can diversifying help them create more stability over the long haul?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of different ways. One is that anytime there is that seasonality we talked about, you have a couple of different sources of information or of income or of referral traffic, depending on what you're diversifying. So it helps your cash flow be a little bit more steady throughout the year. If anything disappears, right? Like let's say some platform radically alters its algorithm, or a site that you use for e-commerce closes, or any of these different kinds of things, you have some other backup income at least already kind of in the making, which is great. If you're trying to be more proactive about that, I think what you were saying early, Angie, is really important, like thinking about what are other ways I can get more mileage out of things that I'm already doing. So for example, I publish patterns on my website, which is monetized with ad revenue and with affiliate income. But I also make PDF versions of the free patterns that I sell. And I don't try to trick anybody. You know, I say like, this is optimized for printing. It doesn't have ads in it. And I get a lot of sales, actually more sales on my free patterns than on my patterns that are only available as paid patterns. And so that's a pretty straightforward thing. It's just really about formatting something that I'm already doing and then, you know, listing it in different marketplaces. Whereas if you start looking at all the things that you're already doing, where can I use this again, right? So if I can use something similar that just requires a couple of different tweaks, that means I can have a whole new type of revenue, which is really important. So I think looking at what you're already doing and then what can I add to something that I'm doing that can make it earn income in a different way is kind of a strategy that you can use over the long haul. And that helps you a lot with cash flow, but also with things like referral traffic, you know? So if as a blogger, you're always trying to get people to your site, well, Google in the past 2.5 years has had some pretty serious updates that have altered a lot of the ways that people use search, or that how search leads to a website. Now there's this thing, you know, GEO, generative engine optimization. So how do you optimize your site for AI, basically, which is how a lot of people are searching now. If you only look at it like, what do I do for AI, but you're not thinking about what am I already doing and how can I alter it to fit this model versus thinking of it like I have to start from scratch every single time. But also because I don't only rely on search engine traffic, I had other sources of traffic. So I've done a lot of collaborations with other bloggers. So I have links that are coming from their sites to my site. I've done, you know, other ways of building my newsletter. So my newsletter also directs people to my site. Because there's so many different things, even when one of them is less effective, it doesn't disrupt you as much as if you're only relying on one thing. And so I think that's why it's important to try to diversify as best as you can. I know it's scary at first because you, especially at the start of your business, you put so much focus on one thing, but sort of opening up is really the best strategy for you in terms of long term.
Yeah, I feel like it's the whole like cliche or idiom of like not having all of your eggs in one basket, right? Like you're just constantly trying to find more baskets to like spread out your eggs. So if you drop a basket, you're not going to lose all of your eggs. So I'll make a little example here in that I was selling art prints that were printed out and shipped from my Etsy shop. And I decided one day, what if I sold this also as a digital file? And I sell just as many digital files as I do. And I like literally did not have to do anything except make a second Etsy listing. It was very easy for me to add something else to my shop without having to do almost any extra work.
I feel like we've all said in one way or another about maximizing each piece of content or each Etsy listing, whatever your product is, maximizing that, you know, effectively. So reusing content that you have on Instagram on a different platform. But like Corey said, using an Etsy listing in a different way. Marie talked about giving away a free pattern, but also selling a printed copy. So think about each little thing you're doing and how you can utilize it to the most effective way for just one person. So how can you use that content again and again? And one tip I was going to give, and I feel like I've given this before, but like on Instagram, I will reuse content. No one knows that you shared that last Christmas. There's no reason to make new Christmas, content to get engagement on Instagram this year. You can reshare the stuff you shared last year. No one remembers. So reshare that popular stuff again and again and again. Absolutely no one remembers, and it makes your life a lot easier.
Absolutely. I think so many people don't reuse their own stuff. Like right now I have something like 700 plus patterns. I don't remember the exact amount. But if I don't reshare, the 650 that I didn't put out this year, that's just, like a wasted opportunity for me. So definitely resharing your own stuff is another way to think about it too.
All right. Should we do a commercial break?
Let's do it. So this is my product. I'll go ahead and do the commercial break. And Marie gave us like the perfect segue. So we don't have an episode of Crafting for Profit Live without talking about an email newsletter. So I have a new product. It's called Email Marketing for Creatives. And this is your complete guide to setting up your email list from the very beginning. I show you screenshots, walk you through the entire setup process. So you're going to start your email list, and I'm going to walk you through how to start growing it as well as writing those emails. So start capturing those leads today. We always encourage you to do that, but now we have the step-by-step guide for you to do it.
This is awesome because we always are like, build your email list. And everybody's like, how? Now we got it. We give tips and tricks here and there, but Angie has the complete guide. An email list is not dependent on an algorithm. Can we all just get an amen? So building your email list is one way to be able to get in front of your people without Facebook or Google or Instagram saying, not today. So it's really, really a great thing to set up if you're running a small business, and we encourage it for all of you.
All right, so this product is normally $37, but I'm offering it here for $19. And you can check it out at link.craftingcamps.com/email, and that's EMAIL. And for those of you on YouTube, I did put a QR code in the corner as well, and the link will be in the podcast description as well as the show notes.
All right, back to our episode. So a lot of crafters, including me, I remember this happening to me, and it's kind of happening to me right now in my Etsy business that I opened up. They hit a wall kind of around year 2, year 3, when all of like that initial excitement sort of fades and it starts feeling like real work, right? So what would you give somebody at this stage to like push through, keep growing?
Yeah. I mean, I think first knowing that that's a thing is super helpful. A lot of, again, if you're just starting your business from scratch, you're just like, yay, I'm so excited. And it's going to always be this way. And that's not really how it is. There's going to be, ebbs and flows definitely over time. I think one thing that's really important is to try to look at it like, like the saying, it's a marathon and not a sprint. I think a lot of people come into the craft industry with this sort of magic bullet, like I'm going to make whatever, it's going to go viral, I'm going to make $1 zillion, and then that's the end of it. And it's not really that way if you want to use it for long-term stable income. And so shifting your mindset from that kind of like, I'm just trying to run up this hill and then it's all over, to more thinking about, okay, when I get to the top of this hill, there's another hill I'm also going to have to climb, and sort of pacing yourself and also taking breaks for yourself, I think is really important. Another thing about hitting the wall, I've gone back and forth in different times over the years. Sometimes I've done the thing where I chunk my days up. So, like I only do administrative stuff on Monday and I only do photography on Tuesday. And those kind of things are, they're more efficient to some degree from time management perspective, but they're not always what you want to do creatively. So I sort of suggest maybe switching it up when you feel like you've hit a wall whatever it is that you're doing in terms of how you schedule yourself or your workspace, thinking about like, can I reorganize this or do something different that will help me feel a little bit more inspired right now. It may not be the most optimal way of having my space or doing work forever, but if you need to do something super fun every day to feel better, like pick those things about your work that you enjoy more and try to build those in. And, you know, most of us are doing this because we're creative. So the other thing I would suggest is, and I struggle with this too, but trying to do something creative that has nothing to do with your business. When I moved to Vermont a couple years ago, I was really struggling with the transition and being away from family. And I didn't want to just be all work and then all business all the time. And I bought one of those kits for making pot holders like we used to do when you were kids with the little bands. And I had so much fun with that. I did not make a video tutorial about it. I didn't sell it, you know, on affiliate links. I didn't even post on Instagram, anything like that. I just made some of these pot holders for myself and my family. And I did like 5 of them, and then I just felt great. And so sometimes these little breaks that are creative, but just for you and not for the business they're definitely worth it in terms of changing your energy so you don't feel that kind of wall in front of you.
So I also think it gets really hard to do something creative just for you because you tend to want to film everything. There's a saying like everything is content. Just don't fall into that trap. So don't fall into the trap of making everything have to be content. So just doing something for yourself. And I mean, maybe that doesn't for you, if crafting turns into work, maybe it looks like reading a book or working a puzzle or something else that kind of gets that outlet for you. Whatever it looks like, just be sure to get that time into your day, into your week, and make sure you're taking time for yourself. I feel like it's especially hard when you're working for yourself to want to work all the time. So there's no separation between like a work life and then you drive home or you commute home and you have a home life. There's no separation at that point. You're working for yourself. So the home life and the work life tends to kind of intermingle together. And it's all of a sudden like, where does that separation come from? So just, you know, looking deep and finding that separation back for yourself is often really helpful.
Super helpful and important too.
All right. So when it comes to longevity, systems are going to matter. So are there any behind the scenes things like time management, organization, financial type of things that you think make the biggest difference in staying sustainable long term?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, again, play to your strengths and the type of systems that work for you. So for my own business, again, knowing that it's cyclical, I do, you know, certain things, certain times of the year. I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of collaborations in my business. So I do a lot of make-alongs that have multiple different bloggers involved. And I pretty much use the same ones every year. So if it worked last year, we're going to do it again this year. If it wasn't great last year, okay, probably something around the same time, but maybe a little bit different in terms of like what type of projects we're making or what type of skills are being used or that sort of thing. And so one that takes my mental load down like 70 notches because I'm not always, oh, what am I doing in January? It's like, this is what I do in January and this is what I do in February. So all of those decisions are, you know, kind of taken away. So you don't have to constantly be creating new concepts and ideas. You're just focusing on the actual creative output, not on the structure of the creative output. So that's the first thing is that. Similarly, for my newsletter, I actually have, you know, like what was the topic of my newsletter for every year, every week. So I know that, you know, like the 3rd week of October, there's going to be like scarf patterns or whatever it is. I don't know if that's the exact thing, but something like that. And I have all of that already saved. So I'm not sitting there on Friday night going, gosh, what's my newsletter about? You know? So I think anything that you do, kind of keeping it stored somewhere. So for me, I use a mix of things like Google Drive that I have, you know, like spreadsheets with, you know, the dates that I can sort, for example. And then I use a paper calendar because that's just what I like. So I have a paper calendar that I look at, and that just reminds me of important deadlines that are coming up. But again, play to your strengths. If you're more of the phone alert type person, then put it into your phone. Like, you have to do the ways that it's going to work for you. You can't pick some generic way that it worked for somebody else. I mean, that's why you have your own business and you're not just working at somebody else's business. So, picking the systems that work for you is really helpful. I think it's hard to do time management well when you're at the early stage of your business because you don't know how long things take. You haven't done it 55 times, right? So a lot of times you underestimate and you're like hitting up against deadlines. I remember like in the craft show days, I remember being the night before, still crocheting hats and things like that because I didn't have enough inventory, just because I didn't think about, oh, how long does it take to have this much, right? But over time, those things more, so it's better and easier for you to plan. But documenting what you did is super helpful so that you don't have to think it through every single time. So whether that's on, like I said, like a Google thing, it's on your phone, it's on paper, whatever it is, having something you can look back and say, this is what I did last year, this is what I can do again next year. And then just taking all that decision making away so that you're just focusing in on the specific creative thing that you're doing and not the infrastructure, which is a lot more work. So as you kind of put those things into play, look at, depending on the type of craft that you do, what's the lead time for those kind of things? How far in advance are people thinking about those things? So, I do a lot of crochet. It takes a certain amount of time to crochet a blanket. So if I was gonna, let's say, make a Christmas themed blanket, I'm not putting it out on December 20th because no one's gonna be able to make that in 4 days, right? That might be a thing I'm doing back in September, even August. And if you're making finished products, like when are people buying those? How far in advance do they buy them based on different holidays, different seasons, and sort of making sure that you have the stuff ready to go with the type of lead time that whoever your audience is needs for that kind of thing. So some of us have crafts that are more last minute. So you could put something out on December 20th and it could be, like a huge hit, but other people can't. So kind of thinking about, your particular audience, how do they find things? How long does it take them to buy or to do the thing? And then that helps you put in some time management structures for yourself, especially in those early years when you don't have, what I've been doing for 5 years already sitting there at your disposal.
I really like what you have to say about making a list of emails that you've already sent, because I will go back and look at what I sent this last time this year, but it would be even easier to have a spreadsheet that just said, oh, I sent Apple SVGs this year, or I sent Halloween stickers last year, or whatever it was. And I feel like I'm going to definitely do that.
Yeah, I also keep, I have sheets of all the content that I reshare. So like, how often did I reshare this on Facebook, on email, so that I'm not doing the opposite where it's like, you just sent me that pattern last week. Like Angie, you were saying you could show that reel from Christmas last year, but not if you just showed it yesterday, so you have to have some kind of way of saying, okay, I can reshare it, but not that often, right? So I try to keep myself to usually like every couple of months, but I have a lot more content now, so I can do that. When I first started, I didn't have as much content that I could space it out that often. So that's also something that helps.
You talked about creatives underestimating the time things take, and I think that's a toxic trait of most creative people. So if you can get into the habit of if you think like, oh, that should take me about 15 minutes, just go ahead and, block out 30, maybe an hour, because it is definitely my toxic trait of like, oh, I can get that done really quickly. I feel like that is something common I see with a lot of people I talk to that are creative. They're like, oh, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal.
All right. So let's talk about personal growth a little bit. How have you changed, like as a person and a business owner? Not necessarily how has your business changed, but how have you changed, and how has your personal evolution, how's that impacted your business?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been interesting because my career has also changed a lot. my full-time career. So one of the things is that I now, as I mentioned, I teach business. So I can sort of see some of the traits and things that I've done and how that applies to folks in my classes and things like that, which is, helpful for me because I'm someone that I like having more tangible examples for myself as far as how I learn. I think it really encouraged me to build a better network of support. So I think when you work in a more traditional job, it's just way easier to meet people, because you're there with them at work, and to find people that kind of understand what your work situation is. And you don't have to constantly be trying to find those people. And I'm an introvert, so I don't love, networking, and all those things are not things that come natural to me. But I would say that's probably the biggest part of my personal growth. It was putting myself out there, going to events, actually introducing myself to people, talking to people, and sort of building those relationships with people that could be a support system for you for something that a lot of other people don't understand. Like, my family is awesome, and, my partner's awesome. A lot of my friends are awesome too, but they're not having a similar experience. So it's hard to kind of go to them and say, this thing happened, like this algorithm changed and it really affected me. They're not really going to see that. A lot of times as a consumer of the algorithm, they don't even know anything has changed for a much longer than it happened. They'll suddenly say, hey, wait a minute, I haven't seen that creator I followed, but it won't be an instant thing that they'll notice right away. So I think just going outside of my comfort zone to build those relationships, that's been really important for me personally, because those people have just, provided a lot of resources and, knowledge and emotional support and, sense of humor and all those things that, friends can give you and acquaintances that can give you. But I had to kind of build that for myself in this industry. And so that was, I would say that's probably the biggest personal growth thing for me.
I would say same. I think we could start an introvert club right here. So I would say the same thing. It's hard to push yourself, and it's almost like forcing yourself to be extroverted a little bit, but just kind of putting yourself out there, making those connections. And it can be so hard as someone that doesn't necessarily want to be the first to speak up at something. But it is something that's so important. And it's one of those things that it makes, are you going to make any more sales by making other friends that are creatives? Possibly, but just having someone there that understands you is going to help you so much with the mental load that we've mentioned a few times, that it's going to be well worth it in the long run. All right, Marie, for our final question, if you were starting your craft business over again today, if you have all the knowledge you have now, is there one thing you would do differently to set yourself up for long-term success from day one?
I think probably I would have focused on learning some foundational skills earlier. And I'm thinking specifically video and photography. When I started, and you folks are in the same boat, pictures were just less important than they are now. And so I had taken, photography in high school, and I kind of understood some stuff about photography, but I didn't really focus in on it that much. And it wasn't until I'm going to say maybe 6 or 8 years after I already started my business that I started to realize, okay, I have to do this a lot more. And taking an actual photography class for photographers, not one that was product photography only for businesses, it really gave me just, such a full understanding of everything that goes into photography. The class I took was more art oriented. Most of the people were, photographers or wannabe photographers. And so I had, done all the little classes on how to take pictures for Etsy and that kind of thing, but I didn't have kind of the full gamut. So I think looking again at your strengths and where you're not as strong and trying to figure out, are there some foundational skills? For me, it was photography for sure. I think when I did the podcast, I learned a lot about audio, which has really been helpful to me doing video, because most of what people complain about is always, I can't hear you, the sound isn't good enough, or there's background noise or whatever. So I think for me, it was sort of looking at what are the technical skills that I need. And maybe if I would have done some of those things earlier, I think I would have had better habits, but also just better products. So now it's like I have certain patterns that are great, but the pictures are terrible. And then you have to either pay someone to make it again, or you have to do it again, which cuts into your time to making something new. So it's like the more skill building you can do up front, especially when your business is probably a little bit slower anyway, that's going to just pay off in the long haul. And so for me, I think I wish I had done some of those things much earlier, get a better camera, all of that stuff like way at the beginning rather than, 6-8 years in. I think that would have been something I should have done differently. But again, it's all learning, and the way I did it is fine. But if I was starting today, I would do that differently.
This was years ago, but going through my old blog posts and deleting stuff that was not helpful, and, you're doing an audit of all my stuff. I literally had one blog post that was a bad Instagram filter photo of a pot holder that I had sewed. And the entire blog post was, I made a pot holder, ! That was it. It was just like an update. And I just was like, wow, I have come so far from the days of I made a pot holder. That's like when I first started, okay, I can use that as kind of a focal point of being like, Corey, even if you're not where you want to be today, or you're comparing yourself to other people, I can compare myself to, I made a pot holder, Corey, and I feel a lot better about where I am today.
I would say even if you went back and told yourself that, you should take photography classes, you would still see growth over time. So I do also like to see that growth over time and seeing how far you've come. Even in a short period of time, I think you can see the growth and the things you've learned. And I think if you listen to this whole podcast episode over again, we keep talking about education and learning new things and growth over time. And that's just a repeating pattern. So if you come away with nothing else from this podcast episode, it's that teaching yourself things, finding those education classes are going to be so important for your business.
Yeah, it was definitely a real photography course, just like you did, that actually got me to understand my camera. And now sometimes I'll take photos with my iPhone. I don't always pull out my big camera for stuff, but I know enough now to be like, okay, that's going to be a good enough picture that I can edit. I would not have been able to edit it way back when. And so, yeah, you definitely can see that growth where I'm like, I can make that work, or I'm not going to be able to make that work. I need to pull out my nicer camera.
Yeah, knowing the language too, oh, it's the white balance that's off versus whatever else. So I think, those foundational skills are super helpful.
And I had no idea what white balance was in the beginning. You all can look at my first blog post. I had no idea.
So my dad is actually a photographer. So he tried to teach me for years, and I have a great relationship with my dad. But it was like him trying to teach me math when I was in 4th grade. In one ear, out the other, it just did not stick. But he did drill into me the 2 things he wanted me to do with every photo if I didn't do anything else. One was check the white balance, make the white balance. And 2, make my horizon straight. Those are his 2 biggest photo tips. So here's some photo tips for you guys, is you don't want to look like your coffee mug is about to slide off the table, right? You want that tabletop to be, whatever your horizon is, you want that to be straight. So those are my 2 photography tips for you guys. All right, Marie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight. I love that this hasn't really focused on making money, but building something that lasts, learning over time, and just creating a business that can really go the distance.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so if this episode inspired you to think about how to make your business more sustainable, whether that's through systems, balance, mindset, let us know. We want to hear from you. So be sure to tag us on Instagram, Crafting Camps, or drop a comment on the YouTube and tell us what you're working on to make your business last.
And thank you so much for hanging out with us on Crafting for Profit Live. We'll see you in 2 weeks with more tips on how you can build the craft business of your dreams.